The casino was a living machine. Its heart beat with the soft chime of slot machines, the whisper of bills, and the rhythmic shuffle of cards. Lauren Carter moved through it like a shadow wrapped in silk, her black dress catching glints of gold from the overhead chandeliers. She didn't hurry, nor did she hesitate. Every step was a declaration of ownership, a silent grace that commanded the room without announcing its presence. Yet even before she reached the high-limit tables, she felt the familiar heat of eyes on her back. Not the kind that admires, but the kind that measures, categorizes, and condemns. 2 casino police officers leaned against a marble column, their navy uniforms sharp under the cold light. One murmured into a shoulder mic, his eyes never leaving her. The other shifted his stance just enough to subtly block her path, a silent warning etched into his posture. Lauren's heels clicked softly over the polished floor, a sound lost to the constant hum of jackpots and laughter. But to her, it was a countdown. At 10 steps away, the first officer pushed off the column. His voice was low and controlled, yet carried an unmistakable edge. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step aside." The words sliced through the music of the casino, pulling the attention of nearby players and cocktail waitresses. Heads turned. Unfinished stacks of chips sat untouched on green felt. A camera phone rose from the crowd, its red light blinking. Lauren's gaze held his, calm and unflinching, as if she had been expecting this exact moment all evening. The air between them thickened, charged with silent challenge neither was willing to name yet. Behind the first officer, the other adjusted his radio, whispering something Lauren couldn't quite catch over the ringing of a jackpot. But she caught enough to know it wasn't routine. It was targeted. And in this world, being targeted was rarely about the game you were playing. The first officer gestured toward a roped-off side corridor leading to security wing. His partner moved in to flank her, a maneuver so practiced it almost looked polite. Almost. Lauren's eyes drifted briefly over the gawking crowd, over the security cameras that never blinked, over the reflection of her own composed face in a nearby mirror. A slow breath passed her lips, a single thought pulsing behind her eyes. They have no idea who they just pulled aside, and in less than a minute, the entire casino will find out. Lauren Carter had been in this town for barely 3 months. Long enough to learn the streets and the names on the storefronts, but not long enough to be anything more than a mystery to its inhabitants. She preferred it that way. Privacy was her currency, and she spent it carefully. To the few acquaintances she'd made, she was simply a quiet newcomer who rented a small place on the edge of town and kept to herself. What they didn't know, what no one here knew, was that her past was a lock vault and the key was buried deep. Tonight, the casino had seemed like the perfect place to disappear into the crowd. The air inside was thick with the scent of money and ambition, the kind of electric energy only a place built on risk could produce. She moved with unhurried elegance toward the high-limit area, but the moment her heels touched the edge of the velvet carpet, she felt it. 2 sets of eyes fixed on her like crosshairs. The casino police weren't just watching. They were tracking her. The taller one murmured into his shoulder mic, his tone low, but unmistakably alert. The shorter one squared his shoulders and stepped into her path. "Ma'am, can you step aside for a moment for your safety and the safety of our guests?" he asked, the practiced courtesy in his voice unable to mask the authority underneath. Lauren stopped, meeting his gaze with calm curiosity. "And what's the reason?" she asked. Her voice was smooth and measured, as if she had all night to hear his explanation. "Camola, August 19th, 2025, 6:58. The taller officer joined them, his stance wide, blocking her path. "We had some incidents tonight," he said, choosing his words as if they'd been rehearsed. "A group of players cheating the tables. You fit the description of one of them." From the corner of her eye, Lauren could see the ripples spreading across the casino floor. Guests slowed their games, whispering. A pair of cocktail waitresses paused mid-step, their trays hovering. One man in a leather jacket held up his phone, pretending to check a message, but angling the camera toward her. Lauren glanced briefly at the growing audience, then back at the officers. "And this description," she said, "is based on—" The shorter one hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "We have our sources." "Of course you do." Her tone carried neither fear nor defiance, only the kind of composure that made the officers glance at each other, as though they had expected more pushback. A faint memory brushed against her thoughts. Another room. Another set of men with questions they had no right to ask. Years ago, she'd been in a place where pressure was a constant, and the wrong response could cost more than a reputation. That crucible had forged a discipline in her that no informed stranger could shake. The taller officer extended a hand toward her purse. "We'll need to see your ID and check your bag." Lauren's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "On what legal basis?" she asked. Her words were quiet but edged like a blade kept in silk. "Ma'am, we're trying to protect our guests here," the shorter officer said, his patience thinning. Behind them, another trio of casino security guards arrived, spreading out in a subtle semicircle around her, a maneuver meant to corral without touching. But to anyone watching, it looked like the containment of a suspect. The crowd's whispers sharpened. She caught the hiss of a phrase from somewhere in the back. Bet they wouldn't stop her if she was... Cut off by a shushing voice. The taller officer lifted his radio to his mouth, pressing the side button. "We got her," he said, his tone final, like a fisherman announcing the catch. Lauren let the words wash over her, giving away nothing. She could have argued. She could have demanded they explain who "we" was and what exactly they thought they had. Instead, she only nodded once. "Then let's get this clarified," she said, the faintest flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. She turned smoothly toward the roped-off hallway, leading to the security office. The officers flanked her again, the crowd parting reluctantly to let them pass. The casino lights glittered on her dress as she walked away from the tables and into the quiet, clinical air of the back corridors where the real game was just beginning. The security office was colder than the rest of the casino, the kind of cold that didn't just touch your skin but settled into your bones. Fluorescent lights hummed above, casting everything in a flat, unforgiving glare. Lauren stood in the center of the room, the walls lined with monitors showing every corner of the casino floor. The taller officer closed the door behind them with a muted click, shutting out the buzz of slot machines and murmured conversations. The shorter one wasted no time. "We've had report of a woman using stolen credit cards at the blackjack tables," he said, the words delivered like a verdict rather than an accusation. "You matched the description, and your behavior on the floor was suspicious." Lauren let the statement hang for a beat, then tilted her head slightly. "I'll need to see your evidence," she said, her voice level but carrying a weight that made him glance briefly at his partner. "We'll wait for Metro PD." The taller one cut in, his tone clipped and final, as if the president of the city police would somehow make their case more legitimate. A voice crackled over the radio. The words were distorted but unmistakable. "Suspect, African-American female, black dress, secure and holding. Camola, August 19th, 2025, 6:58. Lauren's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Profiling. The term was sharp in her mind, familiar and as dangerous as any weapon in the room. But she kept her face unreadable, her breathing steady, giving them nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence could be as lethal as confrontation. The shorter officer reached for the purse they'd set on the desk earlier, pulling out her phone. His thumb hovered over the screen, testing the lock. Lauren's gaze snapped at his hand. "That's personal property," she said evenly. "You have no legal right to search it without a warrant." The taller one shifted his stance, not quite challenging her, but not stepping back either. "We're just making sure there's nothing here that compromises our investigation." Her eyes held his. "What compromises your investigation is violating the law you claim to uphold." The air thickened, the kind of tension that makes every small sound too loud. One of the casino's own security supervisors stepped in, drawn by the raised voices. "We can't be seen breaching protocol," he muttered to the officers, casting a nervous glance at the cameras overhead. The officers didn't answer, but the shorter one set the phone back on the desk with a reluctant clunk. And then it came, the distant wail of sirens growing louder, closer, cutting to the sterile quiet of the room. The taller officer's hand drifted toward his radio, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. "Metro's here," he murmured. The sound stopped just outside. The door swung open, but instead of the navy uniforms of Metro PD, 3 figures in dark suits and tactical earpieces filled the frame. Their presence shifted the air instantly, their authority undeniable. The man in front scanned the room in a single sweep, his gaze locking on Lauren. A subtle nod passed between them, a recognition no one else understood. Then he turned to casino officers, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Step away from the agent." The two casino officers froze, as if the words had jammed the gears in their minds. "Agent," the taller one repeated, his voice caught between disbelief and defensiveness. The lead federal agent stepped farther into the room, his badge clipped to his belt, catching the light in a deliberate flash. Two more agents fanned out behind him, one closing the door, the other positioning himself near the bank of monitors as if he already owned the place. "You heard me," the lead said, his tone flat and final. "Step away." Lauren didn't move, didn't speak. She let the silence work for her, the air thickening with the unasked questions in the officer's eyes. The shorter one glanced at the security supervisor, as if hoping for some anchor in the sudden shift of power. But the supervisor looked like he wanted to melt into the wall. The taller officer's jaw flexed. He was trying to calculate the fallout of whatever had just happened. The lead agent turned his attention back to Lauren, his expression softening by a fraction. "Ma'am, you okay?" She gave a single nod. "Perfectly fine, though I'd like my phone back now." The shorter officer hesitated, his hand hovering near the device as if it had suddenly become dangerous to touch. Reluctantly, he slid it toward her. The agent's gaze swung to the officers. "Do you have any idea who you just detained? You've been interfering with a federal investigation." The words landed like a gavel strike, echoing in the small room. The taller one opened his mouth, but the agent cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it. Everything you've said, everything you've done in the last 20 minutes, it's all on camera." One of the agents by the monitors was already pulling up footage, scrubbing backward to the moment the officers had stepped in front of Lauren on the casino floor. The images on screen showed the tightening circle of security, the crowd forming, the whispered words into the radio. The narrative wrote itself, and it was damning. "Camola, August 19th, 2025, 6:58. Lauren stepped forward, reclaiming the space they'd tried to box her into. "Next time you think you've got someone," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, "make sure you know who you're dealing with. It'll save you from a lot of regret." Her eyes lingered on the taller officer a second longer than necessary before she turned back to the lead agent. The agent gave her a subtle nod toward the door. "We're done here." And just like that, the balance of the room flipped. The officers who walked her now stood mute in the corners, the scent of cold coffee and stale authority clinging to the air. Outside, the casino's glittering lights and synthetic cheer waited, unaware of how close its guardians had come to dismantling something far bigger than a game of cards. Lauren walked out of the security office, flanked by the federal agents, her stride measured, heels clicking against the polished tile in a rhythm that sounded nothing like retreat. The crowd that had formed earlier hadn't fully dispersed. Word had traveled across the casino floor faster than any dealer could shuffle a deck. Someone had been pulled aside, maybe arrested. Now those same faces leaned, curious, toward the roped-off hallway as the trio emerged. The sight of the dark-suited agents shadowing her drew a ripple through the onlookers, their curiosity sharpening into something closer to awe. The lead agent didn't pause. He steered her toward a quieter alcove off the main floor, where the glare of the slot machines faded and the ambient noise softened. "We had to move," he said, his voice low. They were about to compromise the operation. Lauren's gaze drifted past him to the tables, the dealers, the security cameras she knew were still tracking her every step. "They already compromised it," she replied. "The question is, was it incompetence or intention?" The agent's expression didn't change, but his silence was an answer of its own. She unlocked her phone, fingers moving quickly over the screen, opening an encrypted app. A brief string of coded text appeared. Asterisk phase 2 delayed. Adapting. Asterisk she hit send. Somewhere far from the blinking lights of this casino, someone else would know exactly what that meant. Back in the security office, the federal team had begun pulling hard drives, seizing radios, and quietly taking names. Lauren could picture it without looking. The officers trying to explain themselves, the casino manager hovering with a tight smile, calculating the damage to the casino's image, a damage they didn't yet know would go far beyond tonight. The lead agent glanced around, then back at her. "We can get you out of here now." She shook her head. "Not yet." There was a firmness in her tone that made him pause. "They think this was about me," she said. "It wasn't. It's about the network they're protecting, without even realizing it." She nodded toward the high-limit tables where a man in a tailored gray suit had just sat down, a stack of chips in front of him so tall it drew stares. "That's our real play." Minutes later, Lauren was back at the tables. The scene choreographed to look casual. The agents had melted into the crowd, but she could feel their presence like a second skin. The man in the gray suit didn't look at her, but his hand moved over his chips in a pattern too deliberate to be random, a signal. She placed a bet, matching his pattern in reverse. It was enough. He adjusted his cufflink and reached for his drink. Under the table, a micro camera caught the faint reflection of numbers etched into the metal, a bank account tied to a laundering scheme they'd been chasing for months. As the card were dealt, Lauren's mind flicked back to the officers who'd pulled her aside. Had they been tipped off to her presence by the network she was targeting, or had they simply seen a black woman in a black dress and decided that was reason enough? Either way, the result was the same. They'd nearly blown months of work. Camola, August 19th, 2025, 6:58. When her hand was played and the dealer swept away the chips, she rose without a word and headed for the exit. Outside, the desert air was cool against her skin, the noise of the casino falling away behind her. A black SUV waited at the curb, an agent already holding the door. She slid in, the lead agent taking the seat beside her. "They'll be reviewing tonight's footage for weeks," he said, not realizing we've already got what we came for. Lauren leaned back, watching the casino shrink in the side mirror. Good. Let them look in the wrong direction. In the rear view, she caught one last glimpse of the two casino officers standing stiffly by the entrance. They looked smaller now, diminished by something they couldn't name. She didn't wave, didn't nod, just let the distance do the work. Some lessons didn't need to be spoken. The SUV merged into neon-lit traffic, and Lauren opened her phone again, sending a final message through the encrypted channel. Asterisk package confirmed. Proceed to lock. Asterisk, the reply came almost instantly. Understood. She closed the phone and let the silence stretch between her and the agent beside her. The operation wasn't over, but this chapter was. And when the dust settled, the story that would linger in the casino's halls wasn't about a woman pulled aside. It was about how in less than a minute, everyone froze without knowing why. The lights of the strip blurred into streaks as the SUV cut through the night. Inside, the hum of the engine was the only sound, a steady, low vibration that seemed to match the rhythm of Lauren's thoughts. She wasn't thinking about the officers anymore. They were a footnote now. What lingered was a look on their faces when the federal agents had stepped into that room. It wasn't just surprise. It was a dawning realization that they'd been operating in a world much larger than the one they thought they controlled. The lead agent broke the silence. "You handled it well." Most people would have lost their composure in there. Lauren's gaze stayed on the darkened skyline ahead. "Losing your composure," she said quietly, "is just handing someone else the ending to your story." She'd learned that lesson early and hard. They turned off the main drag, the neon fading into the steady glow of street lamps. Outside the casino bubble, the city felt different, emptier, less forgiving. Lauren thought about the other women who might have been stopped in that hallway, the ones without a badge in their pocket or a federal team in their corner. She knew the outcome for them would have been different. Her phone buzzed once, a new message lighting up the encrypted app. Transfer confirmed. Funds frozen. A clean win, at least on paper. But the work was never really over. Networks like the one she was chasing didn't vanish. They morphed, hid in new corners, and waited for the next blind spot in the system. The SUV slowed in front of her building. The agent in the passenger seat stepped out, scanning the street before opening her door. She thanked him with a nod and stepped into the cool night air. The desert breeze tugged at the hem of her coat as she climbed the steps to her door. Inside, the silence was immediate and complete. She set her phone on the counter, slipped out of her heels, and poured herself a glass of water. The first sip tasted sharper than it should, like the night still clung to her. in the reflection of the kitchen window. She caught her own eyes staring back, steady, alert, but not untouched. Camola, August 19th, 2025, 6:58. For a long moment, she stood there, letting the weight of the evening settle. Out there under the casino's chandeliers, people would go on believing what they wanted, that the night was about luck, about chance. But she knew better. Nothing was luck. Everything was choice. She flicked off the light, the apartment slipping into shadow. Tomorrow, the headlines would twist the story. Social media would fill in the blanks, and a casino would try to bury what happened. But she didn't need the credit. She'd done what she came to do. And somewhere in that crowded, glittering room, there were two officers who would never forget the woman they'd pulled aside, and how in less than a minute, their entire world froze.